Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. My name is Peter Gramantik, and I'm a senior malware researcher here in Sucuri. Let me tell you something more about me. I spent last 15 years in the antivirus industry, previously in ABG antivirus company as a malware analysis specialist. Now I'm 6 years in Sucuri. Actually, it was 6 years 3 weeks ago, and currently as a senior malware researcher. But I started as a support analyst, and I used to clean websites directly since I joined Sucuri. In the last few years, I'm working on signatures, making sure we detect and clear everything correctly. I'm happily married. At least last time I asked my wife if I am, she told me yes, you are very happy. So that's cool. My job is my hobby, but of course I've got other hobbies as well. I love wreck and cave diving and generally technical diving. I love underwater filming. You can probably find some videos of me diving in caves on YouTube. And of course, as I said, my job is my hobby. So finding new detection techniques is one of my greatest hobbies as well. For this webinar, we are a little time limited. And since the world of malware is really complex, I'll cover following topics briefly. So in this webinar, you will learn what is the web malware and how does it usually work. Here we'll fix the common malware definition. Where and how does it hide? I'll show you 3 common ways where malware hides. What is the obfuscation and its most common methods? I'll try to deobfuscate the magic word a little bit, and in the end of this webinar, I'll tell you something about the mass infections and why you should never use pirated themes or plugins. So, what is malware? According to Wikipedia, malware or malicious software is any software intentionally designed to cause damage to a computer, server client, or computer network. Malware is with us since the first computer. The short history of malware, as I see it, can be divided into these 3 phases. First, the academic times, then the wild times, and now the business times. In other words, in 1970, it was like, let's see if we can destroy this computer. In 1990, it was let's destroy this computer. And now, since 2000, sorry, let's infect this computer secretly and profit from it. As I said, business times are until now only it got really massive. In old times, there were just single persons who were creating viruses and generally malware, and these were mostly academic attempts or joke attempts. While nowadays we are seeing professional teams behind that, and this results in much more mature malware. But something still changed since year 2000, and that's the target. And nowadays we have internet, we have websites, stories we want to share. And as an example, let's say I have this awesome My Little Pony website where I sell T-shirts with quotations from My Little Pony stories, which are so great that everyone buys my T-shirts. And it's just an example. But this website is the new target. And that's why I'd like to change the definition a little bit and by adding the website. So malicious software is any software intentionally designed to cause damage to a computer, server, client, computer network, or a website. Because I kind of feel that none of the previous terms fits the website. Our lives are moving to the virtual world, so does malware. It's following us. Websites are programs coded in some language, providing some input and output. And as Marfilo says, every non-trivial program has at least one bug, and websites are programs. So the first vulnerable website was probably the first one created. And the more complex they are, the bigger is the need for various frameworks and content management system. And that leads to somehow a unified environment. And this unified environment of content management systems actually helps the infections, because of when there's a vulnerability and the attackers know they can exploit it on the vast amount of victims that's touching like thousands of websites within one single vulnerability. Also, the WordPress is the leader currently. So since not everyone is a programmer, me as owner of My Little Pony blog, I go and download WordPress for that. And I will be sooner or later, it will be sooner or later vulnerable. In other words, it will be infectable by malware. So how does it actually work? In fact, there are only two main categories of malware. It's this visible malware and this hidden malware. For example, this visible malware, like various defacements, redirects, unwanted pop-ups. When my site is infected with a redirect, you as visitor are redirected from a website, from my website, of My Little Pony website, to my competitor, who does much worse My Little Pony stories, but you end up on his site instead of mine, and you are probably going to buy the t-shirt from him instead of me. And that's malicious behavior, right? You were fooled because you wanted to visit my website. However, you are able to spot it easily. You know something happens just by visiting your site. You are seeing some pop-ups or something, you are redirected somewhere. So that's why, from my point of view, what's more interesting and dangerous is this hidden malware. Oh, and that's like it. Yeah, looks like we've been infected, and this pop-up covers part of my original content. And this is exactly how this visible malware could look like in real life. But as I said, you can spot it easily. So back to the hidden malware, we have various backdoors, CC stealers, black hat SEO. This category of malware works secretly. You won't see anything suspicious on your site, but hackers have now full control of it. And of course, there's many subcategories like droppers, actors, injectors, whatever. But you won't really notice anything. I'm having really interesting complete overview of malware on next slide. And bam, and here we go again. This happens every time you are searching for something interesting. In this case, we've been infected by defacement, which is probably installed by using some backdoor. The attacker with the backdoor has full access to your site and its content. And all the awesome My Little Pony stories are simply gone. Fortunately, you are probably a Sucuri client and will fix this for you. You're lucky. But those who don't know anything about how cleaning could work, they're not so lucky. For example, defacements are not so serious on one side, like infection, because of they usually just override the main index.php file, and otherwise they don't do anything harmful. Only your site is not visible. The only content there is this. You can see this. This sentence is like, "We are legion. We do not forget. We do not forgive. Expect us." Actually, it's a little funny for me because when I'm looking at this defacement, instead of thinking more about these hackers, I'm thinking more about having a pizza, because they sometimes use interesting color combination. Seriously, back to the hidden malware. I've been talking about it, and I'd like to show you how a CC stealer or a credit card stealer works and why it's so dangerous. So this is example of malicious code in a legitimate Magento file. We can see here in these lines, these highlighted lines, that it's collecting some data like the CC number, where the CC expires, CVV, some minor data like user agent, IP client, but of course name, address, city, country, etc. And it sends everything it collected to some email, which is probably encoded here in the base 64 string, but that doesn't matter now. This code simply sits here, does its job, sends the data to the attacker, and that's it. You won't know about that. And now your client is going to buy your My Little Pony t-shirt, but it will later cost him much more because of the attacker has their complete credit card information and will buy something with this credit card. Not now, maybe in a few months, because they don't want to point directly to your site. They want to keep it running, this malware running, as long as possible. but they'll do that. They'll abuse the stolen data. And since we have many fans, they'll chat together on Facebook or various forums, and they'll eventually find out that the more of them has had similar problems. And this will be ultimately leading to destroyed reputation of your site and loss of your fans or clients. Your business is done. And in this case, the malware was buried down in the Magento file system in one of those legitimate files. This brings the general question: where does the malware hide? The first choice is file system files. 9 of 10 malware creators recommend that. The malware is hidden somewhere in your site files. For example, clean WordPress installation has 1,713 files after installation, and they are placed in 172 subfolders. A lot of places where you can hide malware, like this one you are looking at. Backdoor, which had probably some random name, and we can probably directly delete the file because it's clear that it's malware. But there are some others which are not so easy to spot. Like, for example, this one. Where's the malware here? This is obviously legitimate looking code, but there's a malware hidden somewhere. And it's here, only those highlighted lines. And this is just a small piece of malware randomly placed to the legit looking file. And sometimes it's really hard to spot, right? And sometimes it's really not easy to find it, and sometimes it's not even in the files. So number 2 is the database infections. Because modern content management systems use the database. Mostly they store the real content there, and they use files just to keep the content management system running. Whenever the files are updated, the content your site has won't change because of it's still in the DB. But the attackers are aware of this fact. And simple reinstallation of the CMS won't fix your malware problem in case of database infection. Because after reinstall, the malware is still there in the database. And for example, in this case, I guess this is some redirect we've been seeing like a few weeks ago in a mass wave. It just redirects your visitors to some completely malicious sites. And removing from the database could be tricky, because if common users are less experienced with the DB manipulation, they're probably able to remove the basic malware from a file, like we saw earlier. But modifying DB content is not that easy. In this case, the malware is placed within serialized data, and if it would be simply removed, it would break the site. So unless the serialization is handled correctly, it could be cleaning malware from a DB could be pretty tricky. So please be careful when touching your DB. It's often much more important than files. And of course, there's also third possibility where the malware could hide, and that's a server level infection. This is not classic website infection as we know it, and this is slightly out of scope of this webinar, but I wanted to mention it because it happens, and we are seeing that infections every now and then. The malware is not part of website files or the DB, but rather the whole server is compromised. And for example, some server modules are infected. So when such an infected web server module is infected, it simply attaches the malware to every request from a visitor, like request to open your website in your browser. Then visitor gets your site, and as a bonus, it gets malware in form of added malicious code. You won't be able to find it in your files. You won't be able to find it in your DB. Such infection is hardest to find, and usually the whole server needs to be reinstalled in this case. But of course, there are much more simpler techniques of hiding malware in your files or the DB, and that's where obfuscation comes in place. So what is this obfuscation? It's actually an action to make something unclear, obscure. Makes the code unclear, hard to decode, helps to hide it, and it makes it hard to spot. Nothing less, nothing more behind one word. And let me show you some types of obfuscations we know. These are just a few basic types of obfuscation. First one is packers. You can, by packing your code, you can hide easily any suspicious code parts by using some shrinking algorithm, which makes the code smaller, but in fact much harder and sometimes completely impossible to read. Faking legitimate code that's pretending to be legitimate part of the site and it's good formatted and so on. Random names, that's evergreen, variables, functions, other code objects are just random letters. Kind of obfuscation is also using undocumented functions or less used functions which are not so straightforward to understand, and actually abuse them in some way, using them in not intended way. And the last one from this small list could be placing the malware to random places. And we saw it earlier. The malware was placed to random place within the legitimate code. So let's take a look on a few examples. Like on this screen, this is a typical packer. It's impossible to tell whether it's malicious or not without the obfuscation. Legitimate content or file is in the top here. This one is legitimate, but the malicious is in the bottom. But without decoding it, we're lost. That's why creating signatures is not a trivial task, and that's why every antivirus is generating false positives. Sometimes it's really hard to decide whether the code we are looking at is malicious or legitimate. And as you can see, even authors of legitimate software are using obfuscation, possibly to protect their code against piracy. But I've got my own suspicion. Maybe then their main goal is to make our work as security analysts as difficult as possible. Why? It usually takes me a few seconds or maybe up to minutes to get through such obfuscation. And if I could do that, anyone could do. And especially pirates, they can. And I'd like to take this place to greet especially Magento plugin developers. I really love to identify and removing false positives on their code. That's just brilliant. Just kidding. But greetings and thanks. Anyway, another example of obfuscation could be faking the legitimate code, like on this screen. This looks legit on the first look, but when you try to understand how it works, you'll notice some suspicious functions. Like, why a routine doing something with MIME formatting, which we have here? Why should it touch any directories and prepare some directory? This is kind of a sign that something is not right in this case. And I had to study the file more and understand every aspect of the code. And in the end, it turned out that after putting some comments there regarding real functionality, it turned out it's just another backdoor. Evaluating something stored in a file which pretended to be an image. I'm not sure where is it, right here, somewhere here. Yeah, that's what I decoded. But in the end, it was really just a backdoor. And I'm a little sorry about the quality of the image. Because of I took it from my blog post I wrote about this infection. If you're interested in more in obfuscation and techniques, and if you want to read some nice articles, I recommend checking following links we have in our blog. First link is mine, of course, because I'm proud of my work, Obfuscation Through Legitimate Appearance. It's about this obfuscation I just demonstrated. But there are a lot of other very interesting articles, such as these two from my colleagues, Denis Sinagubko and Rodrigo Escobar. They're really, really great. And you can actually find other articles in our blog as well under Tech Obfuscation. I'd like to show you one more sample, and this time it's about how a deobfuscated malware could look like. We are not going much into technical things, but this is nice classic obfuscation. It uses random variable names, random function names, and everything is put together piece by piece from these small portions. And in the end, it gives us another backdoor here that's decoded or deobfuscated malware, right? We have another backdoor. It's getting its payload from some malicious side and evaluating it through the assert function here. And it's actually obfuscation of itself, because of assert function is primarily used for debugging code, not actually evaluating it. So it's obfuscation. It's abused. This function is abused. And that's what obfuscation means too. Since our time is running out a little bit, as I promised, I'm going to cover briefly also mass infections and third-party software issues. So what are mass infections? Infections spreading to thousands of websites. Out of nowhere, we just start to see a lot of same identical infections in our client sites, and this is a mass infection indicator. And the common entry point for such a mass infection is vulnerability in the outdated software. And usually such vulnerability leads to secondary infections. The attackers are, for example, able to upload a small malicious code, like small backdoor, because it's not always very easy to exploit some vulnerability. But such small backdoor could be like uploaded somewhere, and using this backdoor, the attacker is later able to do almost anything you can imagine, any evil action you can imagine, like injections of spam, another redirects, even more backdoors like web shells and so on, to gain the complete control. And the problem is usually on shared hostings, where the permissions are not set correctly. These environments, these are environments where one side infects another side, and inside this shared space, this is leading to cross-site contamination, and it's really hard to remediate. Really nice example of such mass infection was this vulnerability in MailPoet plugin for WordPress. This was pretty serious infection wave where thousands of websites were compromised. I guess it was in the year 2014. And if I remember correctly, the infector was even broken there, and under some conditions it was breaking the infected sites. So you can imagine how big mess was that. Thousands of sites infected, some of them corrupted, just because of this malware and this mass infection. And as I said, the problem was in third-party vulnerable software. So what does this mean? What am I talking about? I mentioned it in the beginning of this webinar that every code has at least one bug. In theory, if you use just a clean WordPress without any plugins, there will be definitely some bugs. But thanks to the extensive QA process the WordPress team has, hopefully no easy exploitable holes are usually released, hopefully. The situation is different with third-party software, such as plugins. They most probably don't have such extensive QA process, and there are also other risks. And generally, the more plugins you have, the bigger is the risk of serious exploitable vulnerability in your website. And because of, you need to think about these plugins as a place where a bug can appear. And these other risks are, and we were seeing it, the cases of abandoned or hijacked plugins, which the developer simply quit. They let the plugin to live its own life, but the black hats took this chance. The hackers added something there, took over the code, and with the next update of the plugin that you used probably for several years, you were infected out of nowhere, and whoa, my site is down. And of course, there is the risk of these pirated themes and plugins, because of if you're going to see some theme you really like and you want to put it on your blog, but you don't have money for that, or you just think that maybe you don't want to pay for that, even though the developers spend numerous hours on building the theme, you just go Google it and just download it somewhere for free, right? Only for free is not always free, because usually in these pirated or nude themes, as we call them, there are various spams and even backdoors directly included, and your site gets infected within minutes or days. So that's probably it. I hope I gave you some basic overview about malware and how it works. But this is so complex topic that it could take several books probably, or this one really thick to cover it completely. Also, I'm slightly better in writing probably than speaking. So if you're interested in more in malware and various cases or case studies, just search for some of my blog posts and blog posts of my colleagues. So that's it. Thank you for your attention. And now it's time to have a beer. I forgot to take one. Sorry. But before the end, I'd like to point you to my new blog post series, The Anatomy of Website Malware, where I'll be covering this topic in many more details, describing various forms of malware, and it will have a lot more details. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. Great job. Thanks for presenting. We have several questions actually coming from Q&A and chat, and we see you there in Facebook Live too. So we'll get through what we can through the recording, but everything still will be answered no matter what by Peter. We'll have a written transcript later, and especially for those who may have missed a little bit of this, and no worries, we have it all there later for you at our Sucuri.net webinars. Let's start with question 1. We have, my site has redirects. What should I do?
Redirects. Well, based on my experience, redirects are usually pretty hard to find. So you can, for sure, check your site files, check your DB. If you find anything malicious, try to remove it responsibly if you know what you're doing. Or you can, of course, check the webinars my colleagues did recently. I guess they were talking about how to clean infected WordPress, how to clean infected Joomla or Magento, and so on. So that could give you some hints on what to do in case of infection generally, not only redirects. Or of course, you can go with Sucuri and buy our plan, and we'll do that for you. So that's it.
All right. Actually, I did get, let's see, it looks like from Tony. He is asking you, Peter, what do you use for digital forensic tools?
Usually I'm using my text pad, for almost for everything. Of course, I'm using some virtual machines, but generally, no, not really some fancy tools like debuggers and so on. Just basic text editor where I'm doing a lot of stuff manually, and when I'm writing signatures, I'm sometimes using like some regex services. So just standard tools, and I'm trying to do everything in virtual machines to keep myself safe.
Makes sense, totally. Let's see, we have also, can a website virus damage my computer?
No, it can't, but it can damage your bank account. Yeah. That's it.
No, that is it right there. Is it hard to decode obfuscated malware?
Well, that depends on the experience. Sometimes it takes like few seconds when you know what you're doing, and when the obfuscation is not so serious. Sometimes it could take like half a day or at least several hours. As I said, it depends on your experience. It's like driving a car. When you started to learn how to drive a car, you are very slow. You are trying to be aware of everything. You are sometimes confused with the pedals and everything, and you are doing everything slowly. After a few years, you get probably into some race and so on, and you are doing everything quickly. And things that could took me few hours, like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I could do like probably in a few minutes nowadays.
The evolution, it's crazy.
Yeah.
I see you, Nelson, in chat. We have him asking, can they attack through email? He received messages from a forum I have with the dummy data during the night, and the next day he saw his site had been hacked. And he removed the malicious files and added us, but the malware was still coming through. That
depends. There are various infection types. Not only this web malware, but there are also standard viruses for computers. And yes, you can get infected through email. Sometimes by opening email, there's some link and you visit it, or it's auto visited, and there's some exploit that exploits your computer. Then the common virus for the computer is downloaded or installed to your computer, and it, for example, gets all your key pressed, or your keys that you pressed, and this way it could check your, for example, FTP password or your admin password to WordPress, and this whole chain could result in the infection of your website. So yes, emails are dangerous.
Okay. Back to one, if we can get, we still have a little time. Let's see. Is there a third-party application for scanning, like open source, to check whether it's a malware attack or not?
Well, there is third-party application. Third-party application is even our site check. Our site check you can use to scan your website, and it will give you awesome results. And if there's something suspicious, the site check will detect that and give you the detection details. So yes, and of course there are other antiviruses. Like we at Sucuri are providing antivirus as well. In fact, if you go with our plan, we are providing you not only cleaning of infected website, but also monitoring and scanning services. So we are scanning your files, your site, and everything. So yeah, we are third party as well. If that answered the question.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, and they also had another one was still with site check, but my hosting is telling me that I'm affected, but your site check says my site is clean. Why?
Yeah. Okay, got it. As I was talking about site check, this is a pretty nice question, because of that's just by design. Site check is designed to check only the website. By design, it's able to detect only the visible malware, which is visible on the website. Because for the backend, for the files, there are other products like our server-side scanner. So it's a check from outside and check from inside. And if a hosting told the visitor that or the website owner that his site is infected, and site check doesn't see this infection, that's probably it's buried down in the files and it's hidden. As I was showing those two types of malware, these hidden backdoors and so on, they are simply there, not having any visible signs. So that's why you could use probably our plugin for WordPress or our server-side scanner, which can detect these backdoors for you. So this probably this is the case.
Okay. We have, if we can get one more in, well, that's a few from see you, John, in Q&A. For everybody else too, in chat, I dropped a link to site check, also to Peter's blog post. So you just put it in here in the slide. So you're welcome to that. And John's asking, how do you protect your home business computer, and where is the Sucuri site check located?
Where is the Sucuri site check located? The Sucuri site check is located on our servers. As far as I know, we have several servers, huge servers, and they are home of site check. Otherwise, I have no more details because I'm not a network guy. Sorry. Anyway, how I'm protecting my home business computer, I'm using strong passwords. I'm using two-factors authentication always, and I'm really very careful about what I'm clicking at. And also, I'm using Linux. That's kind of security measure of itself. That's probably it. Yeah, I can't have antivirus solution on it because of I'm working constantly with malware, and it would be always beeping, bam, malware. I don't want to do that. So no antivirus for me, but I absolutely recommend having an antivirus of your choice.
Perfect. Love it. Okay, I think that's all we have. All if there's other questions, again, we'll get to them. Peter has it. Thank you for taking so much time. You know, you have a busy day being our senior malware researcher, so we appreciate you. I appreciate the audience for joining us. I hope you did enjoy this, thought it beneficial. Peter, I'm going to drop off so you can say your goodbyes as well. But links are everywhere. You'll get all this written transcript, video, and everything. This recording. A little bit later. Thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone as well for attending this webinar, and hopefully we'll see us again in some next webinars. See you and stay safe. Bye.